you are likely unaware that your financial struggles are not merely a result of poor math or a lack of opportunity, but are deeply rooted in unconscious generational scripts and emotional trauma that dictate your net worth from the shadows of your subconscious mind. The promise of this psychological exploration is the radical deconstruction of these invisible barriers, offering you a path to neutralize the poverty consciousness that keeps you in a state of perpetual scarcity, and replacing it with a neurologically grounded foundation for authentic abundance. This profound shift from financial anxiety to sovereign wealth is the core objective of Money Healing, The Hidden Psychology of Wealth by Tetyana Yevtushok. This work serves as a clinical bridge between your emotional history and your economic future, providing the therapeutic tools necessary to rewrite your internal financial blueprint and achieve the lasting prosperity you have been biologically and psychologically conditioned to resist. Chapter 1. The Inherited Financial Blueprint to Achieve a Radical Psychological Transformation of Your Financial Reality. You must first engage in a rigorous, diagnostic audit of the inherited financial blueprint, the subterranean layer of your subconscious mind where your relationship with wealth was architected before you possessed the cognitive capacity for independent choice. This blueprint is not composed of facts or economic logic, but of generational scripts, unconscious narratives, and value systems regarding money that were transmitted to you through the emotional atmosphere of your early environment. From a clinical perspective, your current financial behavior is often a refined repetition of these inherited scripts, as the child's brain is biologically programmed to adopt the survival strategies and worldviews of its primary caregivers to ensure social belonging and safety. If you were raised in an environment where money was a source of constant conflict, shame, or moral suspicion, your nervous system likely categorized wealth as a threat to your emotional security. Rather than a resource for your freedom, the power of these scripts lies in their invisibility. They operate as absolute truths rather than subjective opinions. For many, the inherited blueprint contains a poverty consciousness or a glass ceiling that dictates exactly how much success is permissible before it threatens your sense of identity or family loyalty. You may find yourself subconsciously sabotaging opportunities or engaging in impulsive spending, not because you lack discipline, but because your subconscious is attempting to return you to the financial set point it was programmed to maintain. If your family's narrative was that we are not the kind of people who get rich, any significant accumulation of wealth will trigger a psychological alarm, making you feel like an imposter or an outsider. This creates a profound internal friction where your conscious desire for abundance is perpetually undermined by a subconscious need for familiar struggle. Identifying these scripts requires a deep, retrospective analysis of your family's emotional history with money. You must examine the hidden rules that governed your childhood home. Was money spoken of with reverence, fear, or resentment? Was wealth associated with virtue or with corruption? These beliefs form the foundation of your money story, a psychological construct that filters every financial decision you make. Often, we carry the unlived lives or the unresolved financial traumas of our parents, attempting to rectify their losses or repeat their sacrifices through our own economic choices. This chapter forces you to confront the reality that your financial limits are not biological destiny, but a psychological inheritance that can be scrutinized, deconstructed, and eventually rewritten. By bringing these inherited financial blueprints into the light of conscious awareness, you begin the process of differentiation, the psychological act of separating your own values and potential from the limitations of your ancestors. You realize that the anxiety you feel when checking your bank balance or the guilt you feel when making a purchase may not be yours at all, but rather the echoes of a generational script that has outlived its utility. This stage of money healing is not about blame, but about the sovereign reclamation of your own mind. It is about recognizing that to achieve a different financial outcome, you must first dismantle the outdated psychological architecture that has been quietly managing your life from the shadows. Only when you understand the origins of your internal limits can you begin to build a new, empowered blueprint that is aligned with your authentic worth rather than your inherited fears. Chapter 2. Identifying financial trauma and wounds asterisk to move beyond the inherited scripts of the past. One must confront the financial trauma and wounds that exist within the individual's own timeline, specifically the physiological and psychological responses to past economic instability or family conflict. Within the clinical framework of money healing, a financial wound is defined as a deep-seated emotional scar caused by experiences of significant lack, sudden loss, or the witnessing of intense money-related distress during formative years. These experiences do not merely fade with time, instead they become encoded in the nervous system, creating a state of chronic poverty consciousness where the brain remains hypervigilant toward perceived financial threats, even when current circumstances are objectively stable. This chapter explores how these wounds trigger maladaptive survival mechanisms, such as financial avoidance, chronic anxiety, or the freeze response when faced with investment decisions or career growth. The psychological reality of financial trauma is that it often bypasses the rational, prefrontal cortex and resides in the limbic system, the seat of our emotional and survival instincts. When a person with unresolved financial wounds encounters a situation involving money, such as a bank statement, a negotiation, or a large purchase, their brain may misinterpret the situation as a direct threat to their physical safety. This triggers the fight, flight, or freeze response, leading to behaviors like impulsive spending to alleviate temporary stress, fight, flight, or a total paralysis regarding financial planning freeze. By identifying these specific emotional triggers, the individual can begin the work of somatic desensitization, slowly untethering their sense of biological safety from the fluctuations of their bank account. Furthermore, these wounds often lead to financial avoidance, a psychological defense mechanism where the individual ignores bills, avoids looking at their net worth, or refuses to engage in wealth-building activities as a way to protect themselves from the pain of their past traumas. This avoidance acts as a temporary relief from anxiety, but serves to reinforce the cycle of scarcity, as the lack of engagement prevents the accumulation of the evidence needed to build a new, healthy financial identity. To heal, one must engage in shadow work, bringing these painful memories into conscious awareness and processing the grief associated with past losses. Only by acknowledging the depth of these wounds can you stop the involuntary repetition of trauma-based behaviors. Ultimately, this stage of money healing is about moving the individual from a state of financial survival to psychological security. It requires a compassionate deconstruction of the defense mechanisms that once protected you during times of lack but are now preventing you from accessing your full potential for abundance. You learn that your anxiety is a lagging measure of your past wounds, not a predictor of your future wealth. By healing these internal fractures, you reclaim the cognitive and emotional energy previously spent on hypervigilance, allowing you to redirect those resources toward the strategic and purposeful building of sovereign wealth. Chapter 3. The mechanics of subconscious self-sabotage. To transcend the limitations of your past, you must investigate the mechanics of subconscious self-sabotage, a psychological phenomenon where the mind actively undermines its own success to preserve a familiar internal state within the framework of money healing. This is often driven by a financial set point, a subconscious thermostat, that dictates exactly how much wealth your nervous system believes is safe for you to possess. When your external reality begins to exceed this internal limit, the subconscious mind perceives the surplus as a threat to your social belonging, family loyalty, or personal safety. This triggers a series of defensive maneuvers designed to return you to a comfort zone of struggle. Regardless of how much you consciously desire prosperity, the psychological reality is that for many, struggle is more than a state of lack. It is a core component of their identity. If you have been psychologically conditioned to believe that you are a hard worker or a survivor, achieving a level of wealth that requires less overt suffering can lead to a profound identity crisis. To resolve this internal tension, the subconscious may initiate self-sabotage through financial leakage, such as impulsive spending on unnecessary items, making high-risk investments without proper due diligence, or unconsciously creating interpersonal conflicts that distract from professional growth. This is not a failure of willpower, but a sophisticated biological strategy to avoid the perceived isolation or moral corruption that your inherited scripts associated with wealth. Furthermore, the mind often views significant wealth as a barrier to authentic connection. There is a deep-seated fear that if you become too successful, you will no longer belong to your original community or family circle. This fear of success is actually a fear of abandonment. To maintain social safety, you may find yourself subconsciously leveling down your potential to match the economic status of those you love. In a clinical sense, self-sabotage is the price the subconscious pays to maintain your existing social bonds. By identifying these patterns, you can begin to expose the hidden gains you receive from staying broke, such as the sympathy of others or the avoidance of responsibility, and consciously choose to release them. Ultimately, this chapter reveals that to expand your net worth, you must first expand your psychological capacity for wealth. This requires recalibrating your internal thermostat so that abundance feels as safe and familiar as lack once did. You must prove to your subconscious that you can be wealthy and still be a good, connected, and grounded person. By dismantling the mechanics of self-sabotage, you remove the internal brakes that have been slowing. Chapter 4. Neutralizing Scarcity and Reclaiming Self-Worth to Achieve a State of Lasting Financial Restoration. You must navigate the psychological process of neutralizing scarcity and reclaiming self-worth, a phase focused on decoupling your internal value from your external bank balance. In the landscape of money healing, scarcity consciousness is a pervasive mental filter that views the world through a lens of not enoughness, not just regarding money, but regarding time, love, and opportunity. This mindset is often a defense mechanism designed to protect you from the pain of disappointment. If you never expect abundance, you can never be hurt by its absence. However, this psychological posture keeps the nervous system in a state of high cortisol survival, making it impossible to engage in the creative, long-term thinking required for wealth generation. The core work of this chapter is the intentional deconstruction of the scarcity worth link. Many individuals subconsciously believe that their human value is a variable that fluctuates with their income. When money is low, they experience deep shame. When money is high, they experience a temporary and fragile ego boost. This psychological dependency makes you a slave to economic volatility. By neutralizing scarcity, you begin to view money as a neutral tool, much like air or water, rather than a scorecard for your soul. This shift requires evidence-based worth reclamation, where you systematically identify your inherent skills, character traits, and contributions that exist entirely independent of your financial status. Furthermore, neutralizing scarcity requires a transition from survival thinking to abundance realism. This is not about toxic positivity or ignoring financial facts, but about retraining the brain to recognize existing resources and opportunities that the scarcity filter previously made invisible. When the mind is locked in a scarcity loop, it suffers from tunnel vision, focusing only on the immediate lack and missing the broader landscape of possibility. By healing the underlying emotional triggers of not enough, you expand your cognitive horizon, allowing you to see wealth-building paths that were previously blocked by fear. Ultimately, reclaiming your self-worth is the ultimate insurance policy against financial ruin. When you know that your value is fixed and non-negotiable, you no longer fear the risks associated with growth. You become financially resilient because your identity is not on the line. Every time you make a business move, this chapter provides the psychological tools to move from a state of financial begging, where you are constantly seeking validation through money, to a state of financial sovereignty, where you are a calm, capable steward of resources. You realize that prosperity is not something you earn to prove you are worthy. It is a resource you manage because you already are. Chapter 5. Achieving Sovereign Wealth and Authentic Abundance. Chaito complete the journey of money healing. One must enter the psychological state of achieving sovereign wealth and authentic abundance, where money is finally transformed from a source of anxiety into a neutral and powerful resource for a purposeful life. Within the clinical framework of Tetjona Yevtushok's work, sovereign wealth is not defined by a specific numerical value in a bank account, but by the psychological autonomy you hold over your financial choices. In this final stage, the individual has successfully deconstructed inherited scripts, healed personal traumas, and neutralized the mechanics of self-sabotage, allowing the mind to function without the constant interference of a scarcity-driven nervous system. Wealth is no longer a tool used to prove one's worth to others or to compensate for internal voids. It is a stabilized energy used to support one's authentic values and long-term vision. The psychological hallmark of this chapter is the transition from extrinsic validation to intrinsic alignment. Most people seek wealth to satisfy an external narrative to belong, to be envied, or to feel safe in a world they perceive as hostile. Sovereign wealth, however, is built on the foundation of a regulated nervous system that no longer needs money to regulate its sense of self. You reach a point of financial homeostasis, where your emotional well-being is detached from market fluctuations or temporary economic shifts. This stability allows for the development of authentic abundance, a state where you are no longer just accumulating digits, but are strategically deploying capital to foster growth, contribution, and personal freedom. Furthermore, this stage involves the mastery of purposeful stewardship, when you are no longer psychologically begging for money to make you feel significant. You can finally see it for what it truly is, a medium of exchange and a magnifier of intent. This requires a final alignment of your subconscious beliefs with your highest conscious desires. You move from having money to being a person who manages resources with clarity and wisdom. This chapter emphasizes that true abundance includes the psychological capacity to enjoy what you have, which is often the hardest skill for those coming from a background of scarcity. Healing is only complete when you can possess wealth without the lingering fear that it will be taken away or that you do not deserve its presence. Ultimately, achieving sovereign wealth is the ultimate expression of a healed and integrated psyche. It represents a life where your financial biography is no longer written by the fears of your ancestors or the traumas of your past, but by the conscious choices of your present self. You become the CEO of your own internal economy, directing your resources toward a life that feels as good on the inside as it may look on the outside. This is the culmination of the money-healing process, a state where prosperity is the natural, effortless byproduct of a mind that is finally at peace with the concept of enough while remaining open to the infinite possibilities of more. You realize that real wealth is the freedom to be exactly who you are, supported by the resources to do exactly what you were meant to do. Chapter 6. The integration of purpose and prosperity. To culminate the psychological restructuring of your financial life, you must master the integration of purpose and prosperity, a state where your external wealth is no longer a chaotic force to be managed, but a disciplined reflection of your internal values. This final chapter addresses the integrity gap that often exists between a person's financial actions and their authentic self. In the clinical framework of money healing, true prosperity is achieved only when your resources are deployed in service of your sovereign purpose. This requires a move away from the reactive spending and hoarding patterns of the past, and toward a proactive, values-based stewardship. You stop asking, "How much can I get?" and begin asking, "How can this wealth expand the impact of who I am?" The psychological shift in this phase is the transition from wealth accumulation to wealth integration. For those who have healed their scarcity wounds, the challenge often becomes learning how to coexist with abundance without losing their sense of self. This involves value mapping, where you explicitly link your financial goals to your psychological and spiritual priorities, such as family, creativity, contribution, or personal growth. When money is tied to a higher purpose, the brain's reward system stabilizes. You no longer experience the hedonic treadmill, where every purchase provides a diminishing return of satisfaction. Instead, every financial decision becomes an act of self-expression, reinforcing your new identity as a capable and purposeful steward. Furthermore, this integration requires the maintenance of a regulated financial nervous system. Even after deep healing, the world will present economic stresses, market downturns, unexpected expenses, or social pressure to overspend. Integration is the practice of returning to center when these external forces strike. It is the ability to look at a spreadsheet not as a source of anxiety, but as a neutral map of your current terrain. By maintaining this high level of financial emotional intelligence, you ensure that you never relapse into the old patterns of self-sabotage or avoidance. You are no longer performing wealth for others. You are practicing prosperity for yourself, ultimately. This concluding stage is about the legacy of abundance. Having dismantled the negative generational scripts of your ancestors, you are now in the position to write a new script for those who follow you. You become a generational bridge, ensuring that the next generation inherits a blueprint of security, worth, and healthy stewardship rather than one of fear and lack. Real wealth, as Yev Tushok suggests, is the freedom to live a life that is congruent with your deepest truths, supported by a financial foundation that is as stable and healed as your psyche. You realize that money healing was never just about the money, it was about reclaiming the power to design a life of authentic, uninhibited fulfillment.